It tells us two things about Israel. Israel is so compromised that it would be highly likely to find drunk people at the tabernacle. So much so that it's not strange for Eli to think, that's got to be a drunk lady. That's one side. Eli. He's God's mouthpiece for the people. And he is so compromised that he can't recognize worship when it's right in front of his face. This is the state of Israel at the time that Hannah is barren. Let's go back for a second and think about ancient Israel really quickly because we're trying to get into this context, right? 1 Samuel was not written with you in mind. 1 Samuel was written with another culture in mind. 1 Samuel had no idea or concept of Western culture, had no concept of an America, had no concept of capitalism, had no concept of anything that we know is just normal. So, our role is not to try to press the Bible into my culture. My role is to get into that culture and understand the principles that God was unpacking about himself and about other things. So let's go back to church in the ancient Near East. All right, we are going to be going to worship God, right? Think with me for a minute. Imagine you and in your individual families, all the families that are represented in this room, your family is headed to worship Yahweh in ancient Israel. What do? It's not like what we do here. You're headed out, and in our case, we're going to talk about the day of 1 Samuel. You're headed to a location because you don't worship God anywhere you want to. We have bodies of Christ everywhere. We have multiple bodies within Lebanon. In this case, you went to the location where God resided, and that's where his presence rested. This, in 1 Samuel's case, would be Shiloh. So you take your family and you travel to a place called Shiloh. Now, Shiloh is in the center of Israel, if you were looking at a map. It's on top of a hill, and it's about a 7-acre complex. 7 acres. And it was the central sanctuary for all of Israel. All of Israel traveled to Shiloh to go and worship God. It's the place that the Ark of the Covenant was after they conquered the land of Canaan, right? So the Holy of Holies is there, it's set up, and the Ark of the Covenant is there with them at Shiloh. That's where God is. So you go worship God where he is. Now, the tabernacle itself, because remember, the temple's not built yet. By the way, just a little bit of housekeeping. In 1 Samuel, they're going to kind of interchangeably say the tabernacle and the temple. But they don't mean the physical building of the temple, because Solomon's going to build that. That's kind of an interchangeable term. There's a lot of debate as to why they do it that way. We're not going to even get into that, okay? I could talk to you afterwards if you wanted to. There's reasons, but kind of out of the scope of what we're going to talk about today. So when I say temple or tabernacle, I'm using that interchangeably. We're headed to the tabernacle. Now, the tabernacle itself was a canvas tent that Moses built in Samuel's day, that was in the wandering in the desert with them for 40 years. This same tabernacle, and that's where the Holy of Holies was. God had constructed, now think with me again, back to the story. God had constructed barriers so that he could live with his people again. God can't live with his people the way he did in the Garden of Eden because we have sin. And if God just lived with us in our sin, he would consume us. Therefore, he made a way to live with us, but he did it through barriers, through the Holy of Holies, through the priesthood specifically, and the high priest. And the high priest could only interact with Yahweh once a year on the Day of Atonement, in Hebrew, Yom Kippur. This makes Shiloh not just a religious site, but Shiloh is the place where heaven and earth meet. They come together. It's not like we are today. In that sense, hear me when I say this, in that sense, it's like a Garden of Eden. You know what I mean by this? It's not the same as the Garden of Eden, but it's a form of the Garden of Eden. It's a barriered Garden of Eden, okay? God is systematically getting closer to live with his people. And as we said last week, we have never been closer in human history than we are right now. You live in a time period where we are the closest we have ever been with living with God again. The Holy Spirit lives inside of us. Everybody in Samuel's day did not experience what you experience today. Nobody did. Okay? Now, Israel and Israelites went to Shiloh, right? We're all talking about us. Imagine us. We're ancient Israelites. We're headed to Shiloh. You go there on major festivals to go and worship God. There's 3 main festivals that you go on, which is Passover, right? Kind of one of the, they call them the high holy days. Passover, a festival called the Festival of Weeks, and then one called the Festival of Booths, right? They go there 3 times a year. Now, what do? Families would travel together because you had to travel. And generally, this was a joyous, festive occasion. You went there as you were traveling as a family. You sang songs. You told stories about what God had done with your ancestors and how he saved this people. And now we get to go and meet with God. This was joyful. And it was also very, sobering. You're going to meet with Yahweh through a mediator, but you're going to go meet with the God of the universe. Okay? But you get to, once you got there, let's step back. Once you get there, what do? You would go and you would arrive. You would ritually purify yourself, and you would prepare your offering that you brought, because you never go to the king's presence without an offering, ever. That's, by the way, that was true of regular monarchies as well, but certainly Yahweh. You never went into his presence because he's the king of the universe. He is of supreme value. You would never go empty-handed. In this case, they went with an offering all the time, and they would then offer their offering. Worship at Shiloh revolved around sacrifice, not preaching and not singing. That's us today. We revolve our worship services here, not them. Theirs were largely revolving around sacrifice. The worshiper and the family, again, if you guys came and you brought your offering and then you offered it, as a family, you would eat parts of that offering together, right? You would be in fellowship. Now, I think the point is to kind of really point to is you are in fellowship with Yahweh. You are eating a meal, in essence, with Yahweh, with your God, who has made a way to have communion with him again. This was the point of worship. This would be, there's really not an equivalent in our culture today, but maybe the closest we could get, Thanksgiving, maybe. It's really a bad example even, but the idea of a family-oriented, joyous occasion of like remembering what's happened maybe is as close as we can get. Think like that. You're going there, you might eat in the courtyard of Shiloh, you might eat somewhere nearby, but you're actually communing with Yahweh, the God of Israel. Joyful and a very reverent occasion. That's the scene, okay? That's the scene of 1 Samuel chapter 1. We're headed to Shiloh, okay? I want you to think about that, the occasion, okay? Terrible example, but let's think about the American, Thanksgiving, but with Yahweh involved. So it's a I'll stop saying that, but it's a terrible example, okay? But think about it in those terms. And this is what's happening in Samuel chapter 1 when we open the book, okay? Thesis of the book, and I want to really keep pounding this all the time here. The thesis of the book, 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 4, which says, "The bows of the mighty are broken, but the feeble bind on strength." Keep Shiloh in your mind. Keep 2:4 in your mind. Because what the author's going to do is he's going to give you examples. He's going to play the story out in view of that. Okay? And if you miss these key things, you're going to start to miss the tone of the story. And you're going to miss kind of the setting and the flavor of the story. And I want you to get the story, okay? There's 2 groups mentioned in this thesis, right? 2 groups. What's the first group? There's one group that they rely on their own strength. They rely on their own intellect or on their own abilities, right? In their arrogance, they believe themselves to be self-sufficient. These are the groups that throughout the entire book of Samuel will think that they are strong and will live at their own direction. You still know people like this today? I do. They live any way they want to. They are the only thing in their world that matters most. That's one group in 2:4. There's a second group in 2:4. There are those who know that they're weak. There are those who recognize their faults, their inabilities. They recognize in their humility that they desperately need and they're dependent on a strength outside of themselves. And they live in view of all of that at God's direction. The first group, they would call the mighty, will be broken. God will not suffer these people long. That second group, the weak, God strengthens. He exalts them in their proper time. Does it mean that they don't suffer? Of course they suffer. Of course they suffer. It means ultimately, though, God strengthens them and they will not ultimately fail. That's the gist of the whole book right there. We're going to get example after example of that, okay? And it's going to start, amen to you, it's going to start at Shiloh, okay? This is what I want you to, again, keep in your mind. Now let me ask you this question. Of these two groups from 1 Samuel 2:4, which group do you belong to? What, you think this doesn't exist anymore? What group do you belong to? Think about this as we look into this book, these first 20 verses today. But in general, I hope that you can't get 1 Samuel 2:4 out of your mind. My hope is to say it like 15 times each sermon. So you'd be like, I get it. Yeah, so it's like the equivalent of the new Genesis 3:15 for our church, right? It's 2:4 while we're in Samuel, okay? There's two groups. Which are you? All right. Let's step back. I just want to say one more thing before we get into the actual physical text, and that's this. What's the purpose of Samuel? Think about it like this. Samuel as a book, right? Samuel is given to highlight and to unpack the details and the setting, the context of the Davidic covenant. It's the whole point of the whole book, right? Just like Moses wrote Genesis, what? And following, to do what? To unpack the context and the setting of the Abrahamic covenant, the covenant God made with Abraham. So Samuel is doing the same thing. We act like, and this is what I really want to push against, these books were never meant to be biographical. That's not the point. People so often try to get the Bible to speak to things that it's not interested in talking about. The goal of this book is not to tell you every single detail of what God did and what he was up to. The goal is God is a storyteller, and how does he tell his stories? Through covenants. So these individual books highlight those covenant experiences and then unpack the settings around them. And then what happens after, good or bad? How did the people respond when that covenant was given, etc., right? But the point of these books, because God is moving his story along through covenants. We're going to reach this book today in Samuel that is all about the Davidic covenant, and so we're going to start not where you'd think. You would think you would start with Saul or David. We're going to start with a woman. Specifically, a barren woman. Okay. These are, again, snapshots into time, right? Real history. Don't mistake me here. We're not making up tales here. This is real history, but it's selectively unpacked for a greater purpose. And what's that? How God uniquely interacts with his world through covenants. Okay? That's what we're going to see here, these covenant moments. All right, let's read. I'm going to read it in chunks here. So I just want to read the first 6 verses in Samuel. And I want you to think with me, as always. I don't want to ever be, this isn't like a lecture. I mean, it kind of in one sense it is, right? But I want you to think with me as we unpack this text together. And I want you to see a couple things. Let's look at it together. 1:6. There was a certain man of Ramathaim Zophim, of the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah, the son of Joram, the son of Eliahu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephrathite. He had 2 wives. The name of one was Hannah, and the name of the other Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. Now this man used to go up year by year from his city to worship and to sacrifice to the Lord of hosts at Shiloh, where the 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were priests of the Lord. On the day when Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions to Peninnah his wife and to all her sons and daughters, but to Hannah he gave a double portion because he loved her, though the Lord had closed her womb. And her rival used to provoke her grievously, to irritate her, because the Lord had closed her womb. All right, stop there for this. Kind of pause in the narrative for a minute. Okay, let's get our bearings. What do we see? Well, let's just kind of make some high-level observations. First thing we see, 2 families are mentioned. If we're just observing the text. Two families are mentioned, okay? Let's take them one at a time. We have Elkanah's family and we have Eli's family. Okay, let's take Elkanah's first. Elkanah, his family is on the way to Shiloh, and we specifically notice that there are two wives mentioned. Peninnah and Hannah. And what's highlighted within these two wives? Specifically, what's in view? Children, no children. Now that's significant. But why? Here's the goal. Here's the goal for all of us. This is true of all of us, and we're all susceptible to it, which is we read our culture right back into the Bible. Do your best. Do your best not to do that, right? Example. In our culture today, in our secular culture especially, if a woman doesn't have children, it's not seen as the end of the world. In fact, some might even argue it's a positive because there's less, let's say, responsibility. You're less bound by anything. You're freer, in one sense, to do whatever. In fact, a lot of our culture, from the woman's side, they don't even, they're more career-minded. They don't even think about kids until their 30s. Now, I think there's problems with that even theologically today in our culture. But that aside, Samuel's day, ancient Near East, Israel, zero concept of that. No absolute category for that. One of the key roles of any woman was to have children. That's it. And the issue, right? Today it's like, well, it's not the end of the world. It's not a big deal. It would be devastating to them. In fact, in Hannah's day, this is viewed as a curse from God. Why? Because God gave a command. And what command did he give his people? Be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth. Command, by the way, still in effect today. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And so Hannah has a visible curse. In other words, everybody knows she can't have kids. And she cannot live out God's command to do the very thing that she is uniquely situated to do. Right? I don't mean she's a baby farm. I think that's a horrible term. I hear that all the time in our secular culture, and it should be pushed back against like crazy because children are a blessing from the Lord. But this idea that a woman's role was her purpose was to be a unique vehicle to populate the earth. No question about that. And that was a God-given role. And Hannah wanted to be a part of that role. And she's viewed as cursed. And so, this is a huge deal in her life right now. It's the only thing she can ever think about. And then to add insult to injury inside of this discussion, inside of this reality, not only is Hannah suffering, which she is, but she's also being ridiculed by Peninnah for her suffering. This other woman, right, is bringing this up to her only for the reasons as ammo against her. Now, I want you to see what's happening here, though, right? You can say, what a jerk woman, or, suck it up, Hannah. Don't do any of that. What's happening? What is the author trying to bring to your mind? 2:4. We already have two examples now of two women. One of them is being presented as mighty. She can have children. She is fertile. She is what every woman wants to be in that culture. She's the mighty. And one of them is being presented as what? Weak, insufficient, unable. The author's intent here is what we're after. I think too quickly, I do think there's practical application, but too quickly we try to identify and go, listen, even some women would say, listen, infertility was everywhere, and by the way, it's most of the time it's the men who's the problem. Don't do any of that. That's not the point that the author's trying to draw at all. The author's presenting two types of women. Didn't have to bring up these details. He's doing it in light of 2:4. The mighty and the weak. Hannah, Peninnah. After this account right here, I think it's verse 7, if I recall correctly. No, verse 6. Verse 6 is the last time we're going to hear of Peninnah in the entire book. She's going to fade. The mighty, she's going to fade from the story. And Hannah, we know, right? Spoiler. She's going to give birth to a son who is going to literally change the course of Israel's history completely. And so the narrative is going to shift away from the mighty to the weak. She's going to be exalted. And she's going to bring about a king. Or somebody who brings about a king, sorry. Ooh, no, different story. But good question. Okay, good question. We have another talk about Samson, which we could do. Hannah, though, through Hannah's line especially, Israel's entire trajectory is going to change. 2:4 is being lived out in the first 6 verses. We also are introduced to Eli's family. Now, at this in the just the first 6 verses, we're only introduced to them, so we don't have much to say yet. And the question might be, if we read the Bible with some suspense, like we don't know the end of the story, we would be like, where are these guys going to fit? Are they going to fit? What is this priestly line? Are they going to fit into the mighty group or the weak group? We're not sure yet. We're going to find out as the story unfolds, though. Okay, so we'll just kind of tip our hat to them right now, and then we'll keep going. Okay, so see authorial intent. Let's go 7. Verses 7 and 8. So again, she provoked her because the Lord had closed her womb. Verse 7. So it went on year after year. As often as she went up to the house of the Lord, she used to provoke her. Therefore Hannah wept and would not eat. And Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Hannah, why do you weep? And why do you not eat? Why is your heart sad? Am I not more to you than 10 sons? Stop there for a second. Okay. We talk about not reading our culture into the book. What do you think is the natural reaction when, let's say, us moderns read something like that? What kind of guy talks like that to a woman who's struggling, wanting to have a baby? And we go, I've heard the pushback to say, you guys always try to fix stuff, man. You should just listen. You should just listen. And the question would be, is that what the author's trying to get you to see? This is not a relationship seminar here. He doesn't care about any of that. What is he drawing to your attention? This is a better question to ask. What does he want you to see? I think the point is, he loved her. It says it twice. He loved her. There's a mighty woman and a weak woman, and he loves the weak woman. The thing, by the way, in that culture especially, if you don't fulfill your womanly role, one of them primarily being children, again, no social security, right? Children are essential. Think about Hannah's plight. If she doesn't have kids, who's going to take care of her? Elkanah? He's going to be dead. Who's taking care of her? She's going to starve. She's done. Her plight looks bleak. She's cursed by God. That's the idea. And how many times in 1 Samuel does it say God closed her womb? We act like God's not doing this. He's doing all of it. What do we make of that? Immediately people push back on 7 and 8 and go, come on, guys, you can talk better. Like, be more gentle with your wives. That's not the point at all. I think the point that the author's drawing to you is to say, look at how this guy is loving. He loved her. He's loving the weak one. I think that's the point. Keep that in view. In her weakness, he loves her. And why? 1 Samuel 2:4. The weak are clothed in strength. That's the key. Okay, let's go to 9. 9 through 11. After they had eaten and drunk in Shiloh, Hannah rose. Now Eli the priest was sitting on the seat beside the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. She was deeply distressed and prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. And she vowed a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your servant and remember me and not forget your servant, but will give to your servant a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor will touch his head. Okay, stop there. All right. What do we see, right? Again, rhetorical question here. What do you see? What are we gathering here? We're at the feast. Again, this is Thanksgiving, right? Our lame example. This is a Thanksgiving style joyous occasion. Where's Hannah? She's not at the party. She's off. Think of the anguish of this woman, right? Read the Bible with your 5 senses. This is really important. Get in her shoes for a minute. She thinks that everybody looks at her as though she's marked, she's cursed, right? You ever done a sin, by the way, and I'm not suggesting this is sin. You ever done a sin or have something happen in your life where you think everyone at all times is only looking at me? Whether that's true or not. This is Hannah. She is struggling every moment. Do you think these festivals are something she looked forward to? Of course not. Hey, let's go public so that everybody can see that I can't have kids. Come on, think about these realities, right? She's now here. They're all festive. They're eating in one sense with Yahweh, and she goes off to pray. And what does she do? I feel for this woman. She's distraught. She has an opportunity, and what does she do? She cries out to God. And notice, by the way, the vows that she makes. There's a Nazirite vow here, and maybe you've never heard that term, and that's okay. The end of verse 11 says, no razor shall touch his head. We play the Bible game. Where have I heard that before? Who have we heard that about? It's your time to shine, brother. Boom. Okay, Samson. Right, it's your time to shine. Okay. So where have we heard the Nazirite vow? Again, part of the Nazirite vow is you never touched your hair of your head. You never had fermented drinks. There's actually stipulations in Numbers chapter 6, starting in verse 1 and following. But the Nazirite vow was this moment. Now, here's what's crazy. The Nazirite vow, like Samson took, there's others as well, was always meant for a short amount of time. It was like a dedicated, this time to this time, I'm going to be a Nazirite, and I'm going to do these specific things. And then when that time is done, we're over. Hannah ups the ante and says, lifetime, Nazirite. She's desperate. I think what the author wants to show us is she's desperate. We're trying to figure all this stuff out. She goes all in at the temple. We'll do a Nazirite for life. And she's crying out in her weakness, 2:4. That's a good call. Okay, let's continue. 12. As she continued praying before the Lord, Eli observed her mouth, which is funny. Hannah was speaking in her heart, only her lips moved, and her voice was not heard. Therefore, Eli took her to be a drunken woman. And Eli said to her, how long will you go on being drunk? Put your wine away from you. But Hannah answered, no, my Lord, I'm a woman troubled in spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I've been pouring out my soul before the Lord. Do not regard your servant as a worthless woman, for all along I've been speaking out of my great anxiety and vexation. Then Eli answered, go in peace, and the God of Israel grant your petition that you have made to him. And she said, let your servant find favor in your eyes. Then the woman went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad. Now, here's a question, okay? Let's think about this. How is it possible that Eli makes what seems like a crazy statement? That must be a drunk lady. How do you come to that conclusion? It's a great question. If I were to take you into a neighborhood, if I was to walk you into a neighborhood, you and me, we're just walking, and in this neighborhood, we're walking right down the street, you start seeing, let's say, graffiti all over, everywhere. You see homeless people laying on the ground, passed out. You see bars on every window. You see broken glass everywhere. What would you assess of that neighborhood? This is where I want to raise my family, right? No, this is going to be a crime-ridden, probably dope, everything that comes with it, style of neighborhood, right? Just the context would let you to naturally assume this is probably likely. What this shows us about the state of Israel here, right? Two implications, I think, that this passage, that section that we just read in 12 to 18, it tells us two things about Israel. Here's what it tells us. Number one, the spiritual state of Israel, and it tells us the spiritual state of the priesthood. Okay? In other words, Israel, at this stage of this game, is so compromised right now that it would be highly likely to find drunk people at the tabernacle. So much so that it's not strange for Eli to think, that's got to be a drunk lady. That's a natural thought. Stop being drunk, woman, and get out. That's one side. That tells us something about Israel. It also tells us something about the priesthood. Eli is not just a priest, he's the high priest. He's the leader of the priest. He's God's mouthpiece for the people. And he is so compromised that he can't recognize worship when it's right in front of his face. This is the state of Israel at the time, that Hannah is barren. I don't get nervous when we look at our culture. People go, look what's happening with our culture. What, this is something new? I don't think it's a good thing. But am I worried that God's somehow out of control? We have tons of examples of stuff that was way worse than what we live in right now, where God can change and move and do anything he wants at any moment. Usually, at least the pattern has been when it's the worst is when light shines through, when something changes. This is what we see right here in Israel. Samuel, by the way, chronologically follows after the book of Judges. The last words in the book of Judges were there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. You think it's an accident that at Shiloh people are drunk? No, not an accident. And Eli can't recognize real worship. Priesthood's compromised, Israel's compromised. Let's do the last few verses here, and then we'll make some observations. 19. They rose early in the morning, right after they received their blessing. He rose early in the morning and worshiped before the Lord. Then they went back to their home at Ramah. And Elkanah knew Hannah, his wife, and the Lord remembered her. And in due time, Hannah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Samuel, for she said, I have asked for him from the Lord. By the way, his Hebrew name is so cool. We don't have time. It'd be too much of a deviation, but we should talk afterwards, because it is so cool, his name, and how it plays into this whole thing. Shmuel is how you say it in Hebrew, but it's a really cool construction. So this is what we have. They left in the morning, they go back, and God remembers. God breaks the bow of the mighty, and he binds the weak with strength. He opens her womb. Okay. Now, the Lord remembers those who walk in humility, I think is one of the keys. But let's do some application. So this is just the 20 verses of a setting here. These are just the setting of 1 Samuel. And I think what the author, in view of the thesis, is trying to get to kind of jump off the page to us. Okay? Now the question becomes, what does this have to do with our life? We're not ancient Israelites. We don't have a tabernacle. None of this applies to us on a personal level, certainly on a cultural level, or does it? What do we do with this kind of thing? Well, I think that we can make some observations here that will show us who God is and what he still demands of his people. This is the same God who's never changing, right? We act like there's a God of the Old Testament and a God of the New Testament. Not true. One story being told. The same God who said this in 2:4 is with us today. Same God. So then what do we do with this? Okay. Let me make some observations about 1 through 20 in general. I want you to see this here. If you've ever struggled, you can identify with multiple different characters here, right? I don't know where each of you guys are at. So let's make this internal for a minute. You ever struggled with what you would perceive as unanswered prayer? I don't like that term. I think it's a bad theological term, unanswered prayer. But because, again, prayer is not about an answer. Prayer is much more about conforming you to God's will. But have you ever struggled with this idea of unanswered prayers? Well, let me just tell you this. Maybe God is writing a larger backstory through your unanswered prayers. Have you ever thought about this? God closed and opens wombs. We like to say, but in our modern reality, scientifically, we know that that's just infertility stuff. God opens and closes wombs. And what does that mean? I think principally we can say God takes full credit for all this stuff. We don't like him to on some things. God is fine with taking full credit for all this. Listen, the struggles in your life right now, the things that don't seem to work out, or maybe you find yourself in a position you never dreamed you'd be in. Could you be like Hannah? The idea of Hannah is that it's not that God, this reality that you find yourself in, is God somehow denying you something in your life. That's not the point. Maybe there's a preparation for something far greater than you could have ever imagined. Is that true of Hannah? You better believe it. A good question to ask ourselves inside of these kind of what we would call, I'll just say it, unanswered prayers again, is God, what are you forming inside of me right now? What are you building in me? I don't even mean necessarily in my life. We always think about this like in career or some sort of ministry or something. I mean, as a Christian, as if your job, God, is to make me increasingly more and more like your son, what are you forming in me right now by making me wait? You're doing something. That's the point. I think that we see that God's writing a larger story through your unanswered prayers. We know about Hannah today because she struggled. How about this one? You ever felt bitter? Can we be real for a minute, right? There's all these, by the way, let's throw off all the Christianese nonsense, okay? A lot of us say things like, oh, listen, we're not supposed to ever be bitter, and we're not supposed to ever be, we don't ever worry, because that shows I don't trust in God, right? Like, of course, theologically, we're not supposed to do those things, and I know we do. We can at least be real with our weaknesses, right? 2:4. Let's be real with our weaknesses. How about we pour out our bitterness into worship? Here's what I mean. You think Hannah pretended that everything was okay? No, everything wasn't okay. She wasn't fine. Listen, she cried. She cried a lot. And she constantly cried out to God. And for years, God was silent, at least from her perspective. And what did she do? She poured her soul, she bared her soul to God. Listen, God is not offended. God is not worried about your raw prayers. Pray openly about where you're at. In that sense, I mean, turn that bitterness into worship. You push that onto God. And you speak open about where you're at. You be real with these things. The weak are bound in strength. That's the point of Samuel. You keep that bitterness inside, that turns to slavery. Don't do that. Pour out your bitterness in worship. And I think lastly, we'll say this. God, hear me on this, on a principle level, God uses barren seasons to build powerful backstories for sovereignty. I'm going to say that again. Barren seasons, God uses those times to build huge backstories for sovereignty. God loves to push out how sovereign He is. And He uses barrenness to do it. Listen, Sarah was barren. She was being prepared for something. Her son being born in her old age, named Isaac. And it was through Isaac, this was the son of the promise that God made to Abraham. Rachel was barren. She can't have kids. Listen, Abraham's otherwise are popping out kids left and right. And Rachel can't have kids. And she is begging God. You can read it, Genesis 30, and follow it. She's begging God. God eventually does what? Opens her womb and she has a son. And you know what his name is? Joseph. You know what's critical about Joseph? Joseph saves the entire nation in Egypt. God did it through barrenness. Elizabeth was barren. God waits till she's old. What does he do? He opens her womb. And in that moment, she brings forth a son named John the Baptist. And this guy is the voice, the one who ushers in the Son of God to earth to enact the new covenant. Mary is not barren. She's a virgin. Do you see how the ante was like pushed through the roof on this? God sets these patterns up of barrenness, can't have kids, because he's pointing to this other time when it's going to be so beyond human ideas that now she's going to be a virgin and give birth. What's the point of all that? God is the one who is not going to share glory with anything. In other words, the moment that God's going to do a specific thing, he's going to set the parameters in the situation so that there is no question you say it's God. Mary's never going to be like, well, me and Joseph just kept trying and it worked. The situation is set in such a way where God alone gets the credit. Do you know what's critical about Hannah and Samuel? Listen, it's going to change the whole nation for sure. But do you know what unique role he's going to play? This is so crazy. He's going to be involved with 3 offices. He's a prophet, for sure. He's going to go into the priesthood, right? He's going to go into the house of Eli, and I don't want to go into the story further. He's going to be in the priesthood, and he's going to bring about the king of Israel. What does that matter? Jesus came to fulfill 3 offices: prophet, priest, and king. Samuel is a crucial figure in the Messiah fulfillment of God's law. The things that Adam was supposed to be, Adam was called to be a prophet, a priest, and a king. He failed. Samuel's going to bring about, in a very, very powerful way, he's going to be a key figure in bringing about the second Adam, who is a prophet, a priest, and a king. Samuel is one of the most crucial guys in the Old Testament. And it was done through barrenness. You feel barren right now? When God was enacting certain things, specifically covenants especially, he oftentimes used women who could not fulfill the role that God had called them to fulfill. Barren. And in one sense, what he's doing with Hannah, it's a tip of the hat to say, hey, you know how I did that before? I'm doing it again. I'm doing that thing again. That pattern, I'm doing it again. Something huge is about to happen. I'm following the pattern. Here's the point. Barren situations were given. So then when God does move, only God can receive the glory. I don't know where you are. I don't know what scale of barrenness, right? Guys don't usually talk this way. I don't know how lost you might feel. I don't know how uncertain you might be struggling through different things. Not sure where you're at. I do know this. God is faithful, and the weak are bound in strength. And if this is you, my 3 points: is God writing a larger story with your unanswered prayers? Definitely. Do I know what it is? No clue. But I know He is. Should you pour out your bitterness into worship? Every day. Every day. You push that onto God. You have doubts, you push those onto God. You're angry? Push that onto God. You don't run from God, you run to God with those things. And God uses barren seasons to work powerful backstories. You ever look back at just 20 years of your life or 10 years and go, what in the world? How did we get here? Tammy and I have had this discussion so many times. How did we get here? It's crazy what God does. And I can inject myself back into moments of that journey and think, God has left me. And I wish somebody would have told me to read about Hannah. Get yourself in the book and get involved with how God works with his people. This is how he does it. He loves to use barrenness, and he's okay with you suffering. Because why? Ultimately, it gives him glory when he brings it full circle. That's why you exist. Does this make sense? Turn to God in your barrenness, in your times of question. Don't run from him, run to him. And you will watch what God does. Trust and believe. Be like Hannah, right? Who goes to Shiloh and cries out to God, bears her soul to God. That's our call. Why? Because the mighty, in their own eyes, are broken before the Lord. He's not impressed with you. But the weak in humility, those are the ones he exalts in due time. Let me pray.